Okay, so think about this for a second. Even today, after like, what, thousands of years, the name Hercules is still like everywhere.
Yeah.
You see him in cartoons, you see him in classical art. Just that idea of, incredible strength and, these legendary deeds just sticks with us.
It really does. It's fascinating how that kind of stays. And that's kind of, what we're tapping into today, I think, with this, with all this material that you've put together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a deep dive into, I think, the origins and the mythology and even like the worship of this incredible figure.
Yeah, and I think our goal here is not to get bogged down in like, every single, detail and fact.
Right.
But really to kind of like see what the story is.
Yeah.
From the ancient stories, but also like how we understand them now.
Yes.
To kind of weave this really engaging and clear picture of why he was so important. Like this guy, this hero, this god was so important in the ancient world. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think we begin right at the beginning, and most of us know him as Heracles.
Yeah.
But he was actually born with a few other games, Alcaeus and Alcides.
Oh, wow.
And interestingly enough, the name Heracles itself actually kind of tells a little bit of a story. Because it means glory of Hera.
Okay.
And if you know what Hera does to him later, there's a certain irony right there.
Glory of Hera, but not really a fan.
No, not a fan, no. Yeah, and that parentage is really interesting because obviously he's the son of Zeus.
Of course, yeah.
Which is, not unusual in Greek mythology, but a mortal woman named Alcmene.
Okay.
And he was also raised by Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon.
Okay.
So you've already got a very complex kind of, family lineage there. And then what's also interesting is that, he's connected to the hero Perseus because they were both descended from Zeus. So they're half-brothers in that sense.
Okay, so right from the start.
Right from the start.
Like a mixture of divine and human connections. And he's not just like one hero among many, is he? He's like the hero.
I think in many ways, the ancient Greeks really viewed him as their greatest hero.
Yeah.
And of course, lots of different royal families would even claim to be descended from Heracles, calling themselves the Heraclidae. And then, of course, his influence went way beyond Greece.
Yeah.
The Romans, embraced him fully as Hercules, and you had Roman emperors like Commodus and Maximian.
Oh, wow.
Really aligning themselves with the figure of Heracles or Hercules.
That must have been a pretty potent,
a huge
political move to make,
right?
To kind of connect yourself with this legendary powerhouse. Yeah. So where did all these stories come from? Like, how old is this?
Well, the mythology surrounding Heracles is incredibly rich and diverse. The most famous tales, obviously, are those 12 labors, which we'll talk about. But, his image probably even drew upon, much older Near Eastern motifs. Like you see this classic kind of hero battling a lion type of thing. And then later on during the Hellenistic period, the poets in Alexandria really kind of elevated his mythology as well and added those layers of, tragedy and kind of poetic depth to the Heracles story.
Yeah. What I find so interesting is that, you have this guy who's like larger than life. Yeah. And maybe he comes from something more fundamental.
Exactly. So some scholars, like Walter Burkert, have proposed that maybe the core of the Heracles narrative is, rooted in Neolithic hunter societies and shamanistic practices, where you have these journeys to the underworld and these crossings and all of that.
Yeah.
And there's even been, the thought that maybe the myths were inspired by real individuals.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And maybe powerful leaders or, hunters who had exceptional, ability.
Right.
And then their accomplishments just got magnified over time and turned into these legends.
So you start with a real person and it becomes this like supernatural being.
Yeah.
So like what was he then? Was he just like a really, really strong human?
I think that's one of the central points of interest with Heracles.
Yeah.
Is he occupies this very unique position where he's both a hero and a god.
Okay.
Pindar famously refers to him as Heros Theos. And that's something that is quite unusual for Greek heroes. Heroes typically, they have tombs. Yeah. They're mortal figures, even though they're extraordinary.
Yeah.
But there was never a tomb that was definitively identified as belonging to Heracles.
No tomb. That's a pretty big
absence, right?
Yeah, like how did they reconcile that then with with him being deified?
Well, even in his worship, there's this dual nature, which is really fascinating. So you would have, in the same festival dedicated to Heracles, you would have sacrifices performed in two distinct ways.
Oh, wow.
You would have first a sacrifice as a hero with a wachthonic libation. So you're pouring a liquid offering into the ground, for the spirits of the underworld.
Yeah.
And then you'd also have a sacrifice as a god upon an altar.
Wow. So like a demigod almost?
Almost. Yeah. Almost like you're acknowledging both the earthly and divine aspect in the same ritual.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
That's so interesting that they even encoded that in the ritual. But that must have led to like inconsistencies.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Like in the myths. Yeah.
Yeah, and you remember how in the Odyssey, when Odysseus goes to the underworld in the Nicaea episode, he encounters Heracles, or rather his shade.
Right.
And there's this note in the text that says, the hero himself delights in the grand feasts of the deathless gods on high.
Oh, okay.
So even ancient commentators were noticing, this is kind of awkward, Why is he in Hades if he's also dining with the gods on Olympus? And some modern scholars have even suggested that the verses acknowledging his ascent to Olympus might have been like later interpolations to try to, smooth over that, Yeah, so once he was seen as a god, he couldn't really permanently be in the underworld anymore.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so he's not just a hero.
Yeah.
He's not always a full god, in the early narratives. How did his worship actually play out?
The Greeks had a festival celebrating his death called the Heraclea.
Okay.
And this was usually in late July, early August.
Okay.
There's even some potential evidence of Heracles' worship outside of Greece.
Wow.
You have like a potential Egyptian temple of Heracles that dates to like 21 BCE.
Wow.
The link to a temple in Malta is a little bit more tenuous.
Okay.
Not quite as established, but it's possible.
So they had a whole festival dedicated to him. And I've noticed that like there's a bunch of cities named after him.
Absolutely. Lots of ancient cities were named Heraclea in his honor. And there's a little, a small island near Lemnos called Neae.
Okay.
And Neae actually derives from a word that means I dive or I swim.
Oh, wow.
And it was supposedly because Heracles swam there.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah, and legend also has it that he's the founder of Herculaneum in Italy.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, his presence really kind of permeated the ancient landscape.
Yeah, it's like you can't escape him.
Yeah.
And you mentioned like separate sanctuaries, right?
Yes. In some cities, you actually had separate sanctuaries dedicated to Heracles.
Okay.
One where he was revered as a hero and another one where he was worshipped as a god.
Oh, well.
So again, this reflects that kind of duality that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that, historians like Herodotus and even artists actively promoted the worship of Heracles. So for instance, during the time of Pisistratos in Athens, painters would frequently depict Heracles entering Olympus.
Wow.
So they're kind of visually reinforcing, his divine status.
Right. So it wasn't just like spontaneous belief. It was like actively...
He was being promoted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, like, what are some reasons for the enduring nature of his worship?
I think several factors contribute to that. Obviously, his ascent to heaven after his death was a major element of it because it solidifies his divine status.
Right.
But I think equally important was the immense suffering that he endured throughout his life.
Oh, yeah.
These trials and tribulations became central to his worship. And, they formed the basis for, rituals, rites, even mystery cults.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea that, even a hero who faced such hardship could achieve godhood was probably a very, powerful message of hope and resilience.
It kind of makes sense that shared suffering would be like a unifying force in these religious practices. And it sounds like his cult wasn't static.
No.
It kind of evolved over time.
Yeah, very much like the cult of Apollo. Heracles' worship maintained this vitality by incorporating local cult figures who shared, similar attributes.
Yeah.
He also became a really significant patron for men, especially young men who were undergoing military training in gymnasiums.
Yeah, like the ultimate role model for a warrior.
Yeah, embodies strength, courage, skill, all of that.
Okay, so you have these individuals, but then you also have like whole communities who embrace him.
Yeah. You would have ancient towns and cities adopting Heracles as their patron deity.
Wow.
Seeking his protection, associating themselves with his legendary power.
Yeah.
The royal house of Macedonia famously claimed descent from him as a way to legitimize their rule. And we even have like the earliest concrete evidence of this popular cult worship. It dates back to the 6th century BCE.
Wow.
There's an inscription that was found in Phaleron.
Wow.
And then later on, after the 4th century BCE, he becomes increasingly identified with the Phoenician god Melkart.
What?
Which is really interesting because it shows kind of the syncretism, the merging of these ancient religious beliefs.
Totally. So he just keeps expanding and adapting as he spreads geographically and through time. And you mentioned some like specific examples that were kind of quirky.
Right.
Those are pretty interesting. So the different ways that these communities worshipped him.
Yeah, and I think it really highlights the localized aspects of his worship.
Yeah.
So for example, the Orteans, they revered Heracles and they called him Cornopian, which means locust helper.
Wow.
Because they believed that he helped them get rid of locusts, which they called cornopes.
So he's not just about these big mythical battles.
Right.
He's also about like helping out with
everyday problems.
Everyday problems, yeah.
Yeah. And then you have the citizens of Erythrae at Mima who called him Ipoctonus, which means vine destroyer, because they credited him with saving their vines from these destructive wasps called ips.
Okay.
So you see these different aspects of his kind of persona being emphasized in these different local cults. And then you have near the town of Bura in Achaia, there was this very elaborate oracle dedicated to Heracles.
Oh, wow.
Where people would offer prayers before his statue by the river Bericus. And then they would cast these dice marked with different symbols onto a table. And the meaning of the resulting dice roll was then interpreted by referring to an artwork that was displayed inside of a cave.
That's wild.
Yeah, so you have these different...
Like they would roll the dice and then look up what it meant in this like big picture.
And that's why he was given the epithet Bericus. Because of this particular form of divination.
It's so cool how they integrated him into these really practical aspects of life.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's his worship and how it kind of manifests. What about like the guy himself? What are his characteristics? Like how do we think of him?
Well, he's famous, obviously, for his strength. He's known for extraordinary strength. He's also known for courage, for ingenuity, and even for, sexual prowess.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, he has both male and female lovers.
Right.
So, he's this very potent blend of, physical might, but also kind of quick-wittedness.
So he is not just strong, he's also like smart.
Exactly. And there's lots of examples where he uses his cunning to overcome obstacles where brute force alone, isn't enough. So you think about how he tricks Atlas into shouldering the heavens again, or how he outsmarts the giant Antaeus by lifting him off the ground. Because Antaeus gets his power from contact with the earth. And even when he cleans the Augean stables for King Augeas, he uses his clever thinking, He diverts the courses of 2 rivers to clean these incredibly filthy stables. Alongside Hermes, he was also considered a patron and protector of gymnasia and wrestling schools. So again, embodying this ideal of the well-rounded, physical specimen.
So physical strength, mental strength, and then the lion skin and the club.
Iconic, right?
Yeah, like
instantly recognizable.
Instant recognition, yeah.
But despite his imposing appearance, and incredible power, he was also seen as having like a playful side. He enjoys games, he interacts with children. And I think fundamentally he was viewed as a benefactor, someone who kind of made the world safe for mankind,
Tamed the wild.
By conquering all these dangerous forces.
The ultimate hero.
Exactly.
But he wasn't always like a gentle giant, was he?
No, not at all. I mean, Heracles was portrayed as a very passionate and emotional individual, and he was capable of great kindness and fierce loyalty. He even wrestled with Thanatos, the personification of death, to save his friend Prince Admetus, who had shown him hospitality. He also intervenes to restore his friend Tyndareus to the throne of Sparta.
Okay.
But if provoked, he could be a terrifying enemy.
Yeah.
Capable of extreme vengeance.
Right.
And we see this with Augeas, with Neleus, with Laomedon.
So he's kind of got a human temper.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah, that makes him relatable despite the divine connections. But there's also this like kind of darker, more complex portrayal of him as well.
Absolutely. Sophocles, in his tragedy, the Trachiniae, portrays a certain kind of ruthlessness, I think, in Heracles' character. Yeah.
Especially in his determination to bring Iole back as a concubine.
Yeah.
Disregarding his wife Deianira's feelings.
Right.
And then you have playwrights like Euripides and Seneca who explore the more disturbing aspects of his psyche.
Yeah.
These episodes of madness and kind of questioning his place within civilized society.
Right.
They often attribute his madness to divine intervention.
Yeah.
And the consequences of this extraordinary and often violent, heroic life.
Yeah.
Seneca especially suggests that Heracles, propensity towards excessive violence is ultimately what manifests as his mental instability.
So like the cost of being this mythic hero.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the mythology.
Okay.
So Heracles did not like him.
Not at all. Not at all.
And it all started with his birthright.
It really did. It really did.
And her hatred for him stemmed from
Zeus's affair with Alcmene.
Right.
And so, Zeus was eager to prolong his time with Alcmene.
Right. And so famously, he makes one night last as long as 3 by commanding Helios not to raise the sun.
Yeah.
And that's when they conceive Heracles.
Okay.
But Alcmene is also married to Amphitryon.
Right.
And she also sleeps with him that same night.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Leading to the birth of Heracles and his mortal twin brother, Iphicles.
So 2 fathers for twins.
Yeah. Heteropaternal superfecundation.
That's wild.
Yeah. Very unusual.
Yeah.
So, Heracles' very existence is just this constant reminder of Zeus's infidelity.
Yeah.
And Hera never forgives him for that.
So it's like baked in right from the very start.
Baked in the start.
And she's not exactly subtle.
Not at all.
In her attempts to make his life difficult.
Not at all. On the very night the twins were supposed to be born, Hera tricks Zeus into swearing an oath that the child born that night from the lineage of Perseus would become High King.
Okay.
Knowing that Heracles was a descendant of Perseus, but so is Eurystheus. So she rushes to Alcmene's side with the help of Ilithyia, the goddess of childbirth.
Okay.
She tries to delay the birth of Heracles and Iphicles by having Ilithyia sit cross-legged with knotted clothing.
It's like she's just stopping it from happening.
Yeah, just stopping the birth from happening.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, she makes sure that Eurystheus is born prematurely.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that the oath is fulfilled.
Wow. So she just totally manipulates it.
Totally manipulates it.
To get her way.
Yeah. And only the quick thinking of Alcmene's servant Galanthus, who deceives Ilithyia into believing that the babies have already been born.
Oh, wow.
Breaks this spell and allows Heracles and Iphicles to be born.
So his destiny is being fought over.
Yeah.
From like the minute he's born.
Yeah, from the very start. Yeah.
And even as like a tiny infant, he's showing signs that he's no ordinary kid.
Yeah, he's not normal.
Yeah.
So fearing Hera's wrath, Alcmene initially abandons him.
Oh, wow.
And
love.
Yeah. But Athena finds him, ever the patron of heroes. Right. Yeah.
And in a very clever act, she brings the infant Heracles to Hera while she's sleeping.
Wow. Okay.
And Hera, unaware of who the child is, actually nurses him out of pity.
Wow.
And
that's crazy.
And Heracles suckles with such force that it causes Hera a lot of pain.
Oh, man.
And when she pushes him away abruptly, her milk sprays across the heavens, forming the Milky Way.
Oh.
That's the legend.
That's a good origin story.
Oh, yeah.
So he's originally named Alcides, and then later he earns the name Heracles.
Exactly. And when he's only 8 months old, Hera, still, full of hatred, sends 2 massive snakes into his and Iphicles' nursery. And while Iphicles cries out in fear, Heracles instinctively grabs a snake in each hand and strangles them.
Oh, my God.
And they find him, the nurse is just astonished because he's calmly playing with the lifeless snakes as if they're toys.
Oh, my goodness. So it's just like foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing,
Right. This extraordinary
life that awaits him.
Okay, so what about his upbringing?
Well, one of the, after that dramatic infancy, one of the notable incidents is when he's being tutored in music by this guy Linus.
Okay.
And apparently Heracles was not a natural musician.
Okay.
And so after being corrected and caned by Linus, he reacts with his kind of characteristic intensity.
Oh.
And he kills the tutor with a lyre.
Oh, my God.
So he's got a temper.
A little bit of a temper.
Yeah.
And so his foster father, Amphitryon, sends him to tend cattle on a mountain.
Oh, okay. So he's like banished.
Yeah, kind of like, get him out of here.
Yeah.
And it's during this period that we get this famous allegorical parable called The Choice of Heracles, which was attributed to Prodicus.
Okay.
And the story goes that these two figures appear before him, one representing vice, offering him a life of, pleasure and ease.
Right.
And then the other representing virtue and presenting him with a much more difficult path.
Yeah.
But ultimately glorious.
Yeah.
And of course, Heracles chooses the path of virtue. So this is kind of a very popular way, especially in the 5th century, to kind of, give him some moral significance as well.
Yeah.
And then later on in Thebes, he marries Megara, the daughter of King Creon.
So despite his strength, they're like trying to give him some moral grounding.
A little bit of moral grounding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so his marriage to Megara, that ends terribly.
Yes, it does.
And this brings us to the 12 labors.
Yeah. The horrific tragedy involving Megara and their children is what leads to the 12 labors.
Okay.
So Heracles, in a fit of madness, which is, again, induced by Hera, tragically kills his own children and Megara.
Oh, my God.
And when his sanity returns, he's overcome with guilt, and he seeks purification from the Oracle of Delphi. But unbeknownst to him, Hera is still influencing the Oracle.
Oh, my God. Okay.
And she directs him to serve King Eurystheus of Tiryns for 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
And
so he's basically being tricked again by Hera.
Yeah, and Eurystheus is told to, give Heracles whatever tasks he demands.
Yeah.
And these become the 10 labors, which then become 12 because Eurystheus deems 2 of them as not counting.
Yeah.
But the divine promise is that if he completes these tasks, he'll be cleansed of his crime and ultimately achieve godhood.
Wow. So his redemption is paved with all these crazy dangers.
Absolutely.
The sequence of all that, that madness and everything, it's not exactly the same in all the stories, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. You have some traditions that place the onset of madness after he's already completed the 12 labors.
Oh, wow.
Or you have different explanations for why he even undertakes the labors in the first place. Some accounts even suggest that Zeus himself orchestrated the labors to ensure Heracles' immortality by having him, perform these extraordinary deeds in the service of this other king.
Yeah.
Eurypylus' play, Heracles, for instance, depicts the madness and the killing of his children as happening after the 12 labors have already been completed.
So it's not like one fixed narrative.
No, not at all.
It's kind of fluid.
It's fluid. It changes over time. There's different interpretations.
Yeah, and even when he does those 10 tasks that Eurystheus sets out, he's like, no, those don't count.
Yeah, Eurystheus is not happy.
Yeah.
He refuses to acknowledge Heracles' success in cleaning the Augean stables because Heracles demanded payment
for
his efforts. Yeah. And then he doesn't count the slaying of the Lernaean.